That's the new jingle. I hope you like it. Welcome to the third episode of Quick to Listen. I'm your host, Don Mierma. I recently had the pleasure of interviewing Tommy Wallach, a novelist and singer-songwriter who recently released We All Looked Up, which is a novel and an accompanying album about an asteroid called Ardor, which threatens to obliterate life on Earth. The interview will begin shortly. Be forewarned, there is some crackling and hissing on my end of the line. This is something that we stopped and switched out the mic halfway through over. I'm aware of it. Won't happen again, but it's quite intelligible. So I hope you enjoy. Tommy Wallach is a 32-year-old novelist and singer-songwriter living in Brooklyn. He's performed at the Guggenheim and has a successful YouTube channel with over 500,000 views. I'd say the general territory of Tommy's music is Rufus Wainwright, Stephen Merritt, Ben Folds, expertly crafted pop traditionalism, but with thoughtfulness and acid wit underlying it. Tommy's first published novel, We All Looked Up, was put out by Simon & Schuster in March of this year. It's a young adult novel, but I can recommend it to anyone, especially those who are into the apocalyptic, crazy hypothetical scenarios pursued to their logical conclusion. Tommy also created a companion album to We All Looked Up, which is rather meta in that many of its songs are sung from the perspective of Anita, the musician character who exists in the novel. In 2014, Rude Fox Records released Tommy's first LP, titled I Meant It to Be Sweet. In 2008, Decca Records released an eponymous EP of his. Tommy Wallach is classically trained and has serious piano chops. Anything else you'd like to add to that intro?
That was encyclopedic. That was fantastic. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. So in this this is a music podcast. In this conversation, we're going to talk about the novel as well that exists symbiotically with the album We All Looked Up. Can you tell us about the premise of the novel?
Sure. So it is about four teenagers. The protagonists are four teenagers at the same Seattle area high school. And at the beginning of the book, everyone on the planet finds out that there is an asteroid coming at the Earth. And if it is to arrive, it will arrive in about 6 to 8 weeks, something like that. And it has a 2/3 chance of colliding. And that's as far as they can sort of pinpoint it. I have no idea if that's really a scientifically plausible scenario, but that doesn't matter because it's dramatically interesting. And the book just tracks these four kids during that 6-week period as they try to make sense of what their lives might mean if they're not going to last for very long.
I was curious about how you decided on the 66% chance. How would the novel have been different if there was a 0% chance of survival?
Yeah, I wish I could remember. I would have to go back through the drafts. But what I can say definitively is that it changed. It changed a number of times in the early days of the book. I think, if I remember correctly, it was smaller to begin with. It was a smaller percentage. And I just sort of realized that it needed to loom larger than that for the book to sort of be the existential questioning situation that it needed to be for the characters. If it were less than 50% or even 50%, it actually left a little bit too much room for just optimism. And I didn't want that to be their solution, optimism. I wanted their solution to be like something closer to faith, that if they were sort of meant to be saved, then they would be saved. But the odds needed to be stacked against them. So it was sort of a journey to get there. And then I've been told by some people that some people have noted the devil's number in 66.6, which I guess is true.
Wow, I didn't think of that.
Yeah, it wasn't,
because I know that you're not deeply biblically informed. I mean, just.
Yeah, you would think I would have at least just noticed at some point.
I don't mean you're uninformed. I mean that you're not one to see Jesus's face in a tortilla.
Yeah, very, very seldom do I see Jesus' face in a tortilla. Once or twice a month, tops. So that was surprising to me that I had unknowingly put the mark of the beast in the book. But I guess it's there.
Infinite marks of the beast.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
The book has, as you said, 4 point of view characters. You seem committed to not providing one definitive right way to respond to the crisis. As one of the songs says,
and if I could tell you your purpose, I'd love to tell you your purpose, but I cannot give you your purpose. I'm just a man.
What led you to embrace the existential approach to the end of the world? The multiplicity of options.
Sure. So I don't know if this was something you wanted to talk about later, but just to sort of bring it up, the entry point for me for the book was this movie Melancholia, and my joke when I was selling it was that it was Melancholia for kids, which, if for those who have seen it, was a funny joke.
That's one of my favorite movies.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite movies too. I love it. But it really was. I saw that and it stayed with me for months afterwards. I also saw it at the Angelica Theater in New York, where anyone who knows the Angelica knows that every 5 minutes or so the whole theater shakes because the subway trains run immediately next to it. And actually that made it much more intense. Every once in a while it just felt for a moment like the world was about to be destroyed. So yeah, that movie stayed with me for a while, and I started writing something else, a totally different book, and I got maybe a quarter of the way through it or a third of the way through it, and I still liked it. I should read that at some point. But I had this idea where I realized that this Melancholia type thing would be incredibly applicable to a sort of YA novel, to a teen experience, just for the very straightforward reason that everything is the end of the world when you're that age. Metaphorically, everything is the end of the world. And to actually put these people with these very, very heightened emotional states. And in some ways, there are ways in which people at that age are actually much more philosophically and existentially engaged than older people. Maybe just because they have more time to think. They're reading books regularly, which sadly the majority of adults are not doing anymore. So it felt like a really great fit. And I sat down and sort of sketched out these 4 characters, and they came in like 25 minutes or something, the 4 main characters, and they never changed. I mean, their arcs never changed, their backgrounds never changed. And the reason why 4, to roundabout way of answering, I always knew that I wanted it to be a bigger story. YA overall tends to be written in the first person. There's a real tendency to write in the first person, often also in the present tense, much more often than in literary fiction. And the reason why I have some complaints about it, but it certainly creates a sense of immediacy, and for a teen reader, an ability to identify very quickly when you're in the first person. I knew right away that I didn't want to do that. That I prefer the third person anyway. But for this story, I wanted to exactly as you put it, I wanted to talk about all of the ways that people would attempt to deal with this, and just one person would have been not interesting to me, probably at all. I mean, I wouldn't have wanted to write the book that way, for the reason you said.
So the novel takes place in Seattle, a place that has the most bookstores per capita, the most highly educated populace of any major U.S. city. Woo! As we know, we're both from there. Actually, we both went to the high school that Hamilton is based on.
This is true.
How would the novel have been different if it took place in, say, Charleston, South Carolina?
Well, I wouldn't be able to write about Charleston because I know nothing about Charleston. But yeah, it's interesting you say that. I'm sure the answer is that that it couldn't have. Certainly not the book I was going to write, because that would be, in certain places, maybe not Charleston. We don't know about Charleston. I don't know from Charleston, but in certain places that Judeo-Christian response would be the most common one, and that would be the call, would be to respond in that way.
There's fiery death raining down from that sky. And before it lands, well, you must ask yourself why. Is it because you lied? Is it because you stole? Is it because you lost all your self-control? No. This is just a natural disaster.
I do think you're right that would not be the call in Seattle, and that while I'm sure Seattle has a vibrant Christian community, that there would be a existentialist intellectual response. There would be a lot of hippies doing a lot of hippie things, which is what ends up happening in the book, which is that they sort of stage this kind of spiritualist end of the world celebration, which I do think, whether or not it's realistic, it is more in keeping with the ethos of that particular culture there.
I don't know if there's a critique in it, but the impulse that many of the characters feel towards political action is felt honest, felt insightful to me, like that would probably happen, and it is certainly ironic in the scheme of death.
I don't know if this is what you're implying, but I do think there's something a little bit sad in the overall philosophy of the book, which I think is that all of these people only start living responsible, integrity-driven lives in the face of this disaster, and they're not living those lives beforehand. And I suppose there is a pretty strong implication, though hopefully my teen readers aren't taking it this way too much. But there is kind of an implication that probably most people are not living, ethically, socially responsible, integrity-driven lives in general, even though we live under this specter all the time. And that was the point of that line. From my perspective, more so the idea of this is just a natural disaster was just the idea of, this was always coming. And the fact that it might be coming slightly earlier than you expected does not transform it, qualitatively. It is the same thing that was coming for you and all of you and all of us from day one. It is just a natural disaster.
Something that happens in the novel a couple times is that you have characters looking at the effects of looting and looking at burning buildings and contemplating the transfiguration of this matter as it goes up in smoke, and then reflecting on their own impending, potentially going up in smoke. Do you think that there is some sort of need that we have to rehearse our demise through apocalyptic narratives?
Yeah, I do. This genre, if you can call it that, has been around for a very long time. I'm always excited to share that Mary Shelley invented it, which is amazing. She wrote a book that I believe is called The Last Man, about the last human being surviving after a plague, and in her way invented the apocalypse story. There isn't anything clearly before her in that regard. Same with monsters. She invented really the first real monster story with Frankenstein. But yeah, I do think that's part of it. It's a strange way to attempt to come to terms with it. But for those of us that are engaged artistically or with literature, I think it's the most helpful, the most powerful is to rehearse it through literature and find some meaning in it. And that way, when we're up in the middle of the night, as we all are at some point, it provides some amount of I don't know, comfort to have read these stories about people who dealt with it in some way. Though probably most apocalypse stories are on the shallower side of that spectrum, which is fine. But I think, you get a lot of deep impacts and Armageddons for every Melancholia.
Do you feel more prepared for your own death after having written this?
Oh wow! Oh man, that's heavy.
That was going to be my last question, but I think I'll just
throw it in. Yeah, I know. I feel like this is the line where you like slowly lift, your shotgun from the bottom of the frame, and you're like, good.
Behind you.
That's such a hard one to answer. The truth is, really honestly, I would hope so. It's, we never know how we're going to deal with something like that, but it has become more and more important to me the older I've gotten. Somebody said that the art of living is learning how to die, and I don't remember who it was. If I were smarter, I would know who it was. But I do think that's true, and I would hope that it has, not necessarily the exact composition of this exact story, because in the end it's still just a story, but the thinking about it, the spending so much time thinking about it and thinking about how people would make meaning. I would hope it couldn't help but help me make some meaning, and I do think it has.
Because the characters who you have, the history teacher, Mr. MacArthur, who hosts the Constellation of Philosophy after school discussion groups, and you have another character who's facing terminal cancer. These characters come off very well. They've already essentially processed these questions before ardor happens, therefore they don't seem to be shaken by it. It's also notable that for one of the characters, Peter, that the catalyst is not ardor. It comes before, through a conversation with Mr. MacArthur. Can you tell our listeners about the concept of a Pyrrhic victory?
Yeah, so the book opens with this athlete character who in the end becomes a sort of Christ figure, but he is, I would say, implausibly good. But I loved writing him for that reason. But early in the book, he is having a conversation in his history class about Pyrrhic victories. Pyrrhic victories are when you nominally win something, but the cost of winning was such that in the long run it actually is a loss. And it comes from this Roman guy named Pyrrhus who fought a battle where he technically won the battle, but the casualties suffered were so high that it ended up being, it might as well have been a loss, because it meant that the war kind of was lost even though the battle was won. And yeah, that becomes a touchstone throughout the book, because what counts as a victory in a non-threatened world is no longer a victory in a threatened world. For this athlete character, he's a star athlete type who is going to go to this get a scholarship to school, etc. That whole story, and that's a win. That's a triumph. But when this suddenly strikes, this asteroid is suddenly coming, it's no longer a triumph at all. It means nothing. It has no meaning anymore, because it has no intrinsic moral value to be a star athlete. And things with intrinsic moral value at that point are kind of all that count, aside from maybe something like entirely hedonic. But those would be your two choices, right? You would either dedicate yourself entirely to having as much pleasure as possible, which probably didn't have a lot of room in a YA novel. I did think about it.
You allude to it. There are a lot of very hedonic, scuzzy characters on the fringes of the novel.
Yeah, exactly. And
many people have turned to that direction.
Yeah, that was the hope, was to not ignore it, because it's inevitable. But the other option, and the one that these kids pursue primarily, is to find this intrinsic ethical value, find actions that have inherent meaning, which in general just tends to be, as cliched as it sounds, doing something that is actually true to what these people actually want to be doing with their lives, who they want to be. For Peter, it is actually being a good person. He's the one who really makes the choice he starts actually volunteering and doing this. Another character becomes politically engaged, trying to sort of chronicle what's happening to the people that are suffering in Seattle and police brutality. And then for the other two characters, they kind of find their comfort in making art, in making music. But for all of them, that is the goal, is to find these actions that have value on the face of them instead of being Pyrrhic victories, things that look like triumphs but aren't.
You said that Peter is a bit of a Christ figure in his art. I want to talk about some lyrics from your song "Cold as Christ." This is from the LP that came out before We All Looked Up. Seems very thematically relevant.
Well, I bet Christ must have seemed cold, 'cause you'd really have to be to truly love everyone. You'd need a bird's eye view. Stay out of the trenches, only let them touch your feet.
I like that your material deals with what it means to actually love everyone. And love is the central question of Christianity, I think.
Yeah.
In your novel, as in real life, things are complicated and characters are sometimes forced to choose sides. The most overtly holy figure, I would say, Chad I, lives fairly apart from the world. Your thoughts? Have you reconciled this?
Oh, you mean that he is? Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I spent a long time with being a little bit more hippified in my own life, and Chad I is actually a real person who actually goes by that name, believe it or not. Like a lot of people in the book, though he lives in England and didn't work for Boeing. But he's a real hippie person who speaks like that and believes those things and probably drinks a lot of ayahuasca. I do think in terms of that song, I'm very proud of that song. It's one of my favorite songs, and I wrote it about my ex-girlfriend's ex-boyfriend, who was this incredibly nice person, giving person, and I just could not get along with him very well. And it was so frustrating to me because on the face of it, he was so much easier to get along with than so many people are, because he was so giving, the kind of person where, if you were like, I need to borrow your car for a month, he'd be like, oh, okay. And he'd probably give you his car for a month, even if he needed it. But for me, I always bond with people over negativity. Like, that's what I need. That's how I connect with people. I need to be like, I had the shittiest day today. And I need them to say, like, I had a shittier day. You have no idea how shitty my day was and the stupid people I had to talk to and deal with. And when someone just says, like, oh, no, it's been just a really great, I met some really nice people yesterday and we became friends, I just never wanted to speak to them again or look them in the eye. And I realized that that's probably what Jesus was like, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure when people were like, I had the shittiest day, Jesus was like, but did you? That woman who was rude to you at the bank, like, did you think about what her troubles are? And that's what Jesus would have done. And I probably just would have found it so annoying. I wouldn't have been able to get along with him very well. And that's where the song came from. But it grew from there, and I really am proud of it. It's not, a joke of a song, but it is just about how I do think to be a really, really, really good person, you would have to be able to stay out of the fray, because when you're down in the muck, it's impossible not to be drawn into it. And so you would come off as aloof. And that would be sort of the cost of it, is that you would be outside of things a little bit. So you're right. I mean, Chad does represent that, certainly more than Peter, who does kind of manage to be inside it, but also above it in his way, though it takes him time to get there. But that's interesting with Chad. I hadn't thought about it.
That theme also, that of staying out of the trenches, also seems to come up on Bloodless Love on the record.
Yeah, no, that's totally true. My God, I'm learning so much.
'Cause there's no such thing as a bloodless love.
Yeah, that's very true. I hadn't drawn the connection. I wish if I could have put Coldest Christ on this record. If I had still had it and hadn't put it on something, I certainly would have. But you're right that they go together. Bloodless love is about the first line and the last line are there's no such thing as a bloodless love, and it's just about almost exactly that thing, but more with human love than divine Jesus-y love. But the lesson is similar.
Okay, I think we've done Jesus enough. I mean, I love the bit about the conversation between Eliza and Peter, where Eliza helps Peter realize. He said, Peter says Jesus made it okay to love people, which, and before that, the Old Testament God and the ancient gods demanded that we love them, but Jesus said to love each other.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
What does Eliza say next to Peter?
Okay, hold on. I can do this. Let's see. Made it okay to love people. Oh man, I don't know. What did she say?
Well, I don't know what she literally says next. I'm amazed that you'd even attempt to escape
Oh yeah, I was trying
your novel line by line mentally. But she says you're a humanist.
Right. Yeah, because that's the philosophical, that's the religious underpinning of humanism in some ways. I think. I mean, I'm both proud and embarrassed to say that I didn't, I didn't get that from anywhere. Like that wasn't me channeling somebody that I had read, which I certainly could have done, and I read some philosophy and ethics stuff for the book. But that just made sense to me. I assume it's true.
I think you should be proud of that. This is quite a musical novel. Not only do we have two musician characters, but a couple dozen popular songs appear diegetically, including Lucky Star by Madonna, I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire by the Ink Spots, Do You Realize by the Flaming Lips, 99 Bottles of Beer. I'm interested in how music is relied upon by the characters. It rings true to me how they can use song lyrics as improvised folk philosophy, as koans, points of meditation on the lyric. Can you speak to this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I just think that
High school?
yeah, I think that music is pop music in particular is incredibly important for how young people make sense of the world. I think it is, in a weird way, in this day and age, one of the main ways in which deep thoughts are transmitted to young people. We don't read very much poetry anymore. We never read philosophy anymore. So your options are fiction and pop music. And unfortunately, kids do read, which is nice to see. I've learned that being in the YA world. But what they definitely do is listen to pop music. Like, that is universal. And so I do think it's how you make sense of things. It's certainly how I made sense of things. There were a lot of lyrics that were watch cries for me, when I was younger, and still are. I think that actually literary fiction could probably use a little bit more pop music. Because I just refuse to believe that these characters aren't interpreting the world through these lenses that they've had since childhood. I think it's impossible. And in this book, I couldn't even remember probably what a lot of my go-to lyrics were when I was this age. But the songs that I put in the book, in spite of the fact that they're a little bit whatever the opposite of, and no, I guess they're a little bit anachronistic. They're just, for these characters at that age, they would have had to go out of their way to find maybe a couple of these in a way that I didn't have to go out of my way to find them when I was that age. But, Do You Realize is I mean, it's one of the greatest, most beautiful lyrics ever written, I think.
I put that on my senior page.
Did you really?
Yeah.
See, there you go. This is why we understand each other. And it is something I think about again and again and again in my life. And it's a way to deal with loss. That song, somehow just that song is a powerful way to deal with loss. As is in the aeroplane over the sea, the Neutral Milk Hotel song, which also comes up at the end.
So late in the novel, I didn't want to bring it up necessarily.
But yeah, so that's why. I mean, I'm just giving them the same philosophies that I have.
I remember in college, I was in a musical acoustics class, and I scribbled over and over again on my notebook, "Who's responsible? You fucking are," which is a Manic Street Preachers line. Somebody saw it and thought I was out of my mind. I think I was meditating on the idea of responsibility.
It's a mantra.
Yeah, it was. I was trying to make sense of this very intense line of like radical responsibility. The song is called "Of Walking Abortion."
Oh, what is it really?
It happens with the lyrics of the pop songs of yours on your record taking on a second meaning when seen in the context of the plot of the novel, which I thought was great. For example, in No Stars, "If I could give you forever, I'd love to give you forever, but I cannot give you forever, no one can." That's something one would say to a lover, but it's also quite literally true in the context of planetary destruction. Why did you decide to keep the songs broad enough to be freestanding pop songs?
Yeah, so the album, I should make very clear, I cheated. There are songs on there that were 100% written after the book was written, and those are the ones that I see as being not cheating. And Natural Disaster and No Stars are in that group. Both of those were written after the book was written. There are then a few songs that were written before the book was written, but are part of the book. So I just, I fit. There were songs that I had written that I knew. What's that?
Save It would be that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really good. Save It and Seduce Me as well.
Seduce Me is great, by the way, because when you listen to the novel, I feel like you get added depth on Anita's character, the intensity of how she feels when you really hear the song "Seduce Me" and see the lyrics. It's like, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I say cheating, but I want to make clear that I wouldn't have put them in the book if I didn't think that they were perfect. And I'm not as prolific as a certain singer songwriter who shall remain nameless because of names. But I have a lot of songs over the years. I've written a lot of songs, so there were a lot of things I could have put in there. So I did feel that everything that ended up on that record feels thematically relevant to what's going on in that book. Absolutely. But yeah, so a third written after the fact, maybe a third written before, but I fit them into the book. And then a third were literally just songs that I loved and that I thought fit, but that were not sort of integral. So something like Madeline. Yeah, like Madeline is one. It's a pretty song. It's about things that I think are relevant to the book, but it's a little bit of a stretch. I would have loved to, and this is getting more to your question, I would have loved to write an entire album after the fact, so that I could honestly say everything here was written as a response to what this book was. That would have been great. Both as a pragmatic issue, I realized, at a certain point while I was writing new songs, so when I wrote Natural Disaster and No Stars, I could do it. I could get an album's worth of material that way, but it was going to be a stretch. I was going to be pushing. And unfortunately for me, when it comes to music, I can't really do that and end up with great stuff. I can with writing. With writing prose, you just push and push and push, and it's miserable and horrible, and then you have a book at the end of it. With music, I can't do that. If it's not coming somewhat naturally and somewhat smoothly, it's almost never worth it. Like the song that comes out of like really hard work tends to not be very good. I don't know why that is.
Anyway, I don't believe that's how creativity works. You had these themes percolating, and it's a general period in your output.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd say Save It has your most intense vocal performance ever, and also it's great, and also the healthy advice: save it for someone who wants it.
All your ex-lovers, all of your friends, all of your maybes, all your depends. Want you to save them, or save them for someone who wants them, yeah.
This question's a little different now that I have confirmed that this was written before the novel, but still, on one level, that could be Anita's point of view, talking to Andy, who's chasing a girl who doesn't seem to appreciate him. But on another level, it could be direct advice for your teen audience. What is it like having the ear of a younger crowd? Do you feel a sense of responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, it's really truly wonderful. It really is. I do feel a sense of responsibility, but not like enormously more than I did before, because I have a really, really embarrassingly didactic view of art that people yell at me about all the time. I get in fights with people.
What kind of arguments do you get into with people?
I think the point of art is to teach people how to be better humans, and that if it's not doing that, that it's not very worthwhile. Now, there are a lot of ways to get there. I'm not saying that, you know what I mean? You can get there through droplets of paint on a painting. That doesn't, I'm not very moved by Jackson Pollock myself, but I believe the people who are. I think, even though, like, I don't understand Rothko, I would love to understand Rothko. Some of my favorite human beings worship Rothko, including Ellen. But I do believe that even Rothko wanted that. So I mean, like, there are a lot of ways to get there, but I do believe that in the value of art as a way to make people better people, to teach you how to live your life, to teach you how to die, to teach you how to be more empathetic, to teach you how to be, better in whatever ways people ought to be better, which is complicated. All of which is to say that that didn't come from, oh, now I'm writing for teens, I need to make sure to instill them with good values or something. That was always my goal from the beginning, even when I was writing all of these literary novels that nobody wanted to read or publish. That was still my goal. So I don't feel like an increased sense of responsibility. But what I will say is that it is wonderful to be talking to a group of people who are still trying to be better people. Oh, that sounds horrible. It's just everyone else, the older you get, the more calcified you get. And that's something I'm afraid of as a person, and always have been, is that I don't want to be calcified. And I want to keep growing. And I think it's incredibly hard to do, because you get arrogant and you just think you've figured everything out and you've made all the right decisions. And it's important to me not to be like that. But anyway, the point is that these teenagers, they're just not there yet. And they will unashamedly say that they're trying to improve. And they'll unashamedly say that something touched them and moved them and changed them and helped them see the world in a new way. That's something that people say to me now, like, regularly. That's crazy. Like, adults don't say that. Adults, I mean, maybe some do, but it's rare, and it's not rare in this world. So I found it really, really wonderful. And it's nice to watch kids just be reading books instead of playing video games. Like, being around kids that read books is great. I play video games. I'm not judging. I'm just saying books are better.
Yeah, I've taught guitar, and I had a student who, independent of anything I said, I think I'd maybe said one comment about seeing a Wii in his living room, but he sold his Wii and bought a ukulele.
Really? From your influence?
Yeah.
Didn't that feel great?
Yeah, just 13. I felt like it affected, like, that changed his whole life, potentially.
Yeah.
Okay, we have to mention this. You and I went to high school together.
It's true.
Grant called some people.
Oh, yeah.
We once agreed to not sleep until we had beaten Mario's 1 through 3, Super Mario World, Yoshi's Island, and Mario 64. Which, aided by some vodka, we did. I seem to appear in your novel as the character Kevin Hellings. My real name resembles that. Like him, my family owned a large car dealership. It's conspicuously loaded. Kevin is a sort of trod-upon stoner armchair philosopher, which seems like a fair distillation of part of my personality during high school.
Well,
I'm also someone who's willing to go to extremes and warning about impending fascism, which is something I did. I can use this as a microcosm, perhaps, for you. How you assemble characters.
Yeah. So, oh wow, this gets complicated. It was certainly an amalgam. So I definitely did not see, very seriously, I definitely did not see any sort of one-to-one stuff. And in fact, I was a little bit afraid that there was a Kevin in my class, right? You remember this? There was a Kevin in my class who was sort of socially awkward. And the socially awkward part of this was certainly very much him and not you, by the way, and because I was worried that he'd be mad at me, so that was certainly there, but yeah, I all of the protagonists are certainly just me, because I don't really feel that I know anyone else well enough to just, Henry James could do that maybe, but the rest of us, I can't just be like, oh yes, this is my perfectly psychologically accurate portrayal of a person that I knew 12 years ago, that I spent time with. I would never think that I could do that. The smaller characters, almost all of them are taken from some concatenation of people that I knew, mostly just for the fun of it. Those are the people that I knew, and I hoped, and I hope this was true for you. I hope that it was fun to have that, like I hope it feels like you were a part of my life, and I remember that you were part of my life, and I'm putting you in this thing because that was real.
His pepperoni monologue. Do we want pepperoni? Oh man, I don't even know. Hold on, guys. Do we want pepperoni? No, we don't want pepperoni, even though I have no idea why, because pepperoni is delicious. Actually, I'm going to ask one more time. Guys, do we really not want pepperoni? No? Man, that's crazy.
Right? Come on.
Yeah, there's...
It's the best line in the book.